Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Innovator Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Williams, and in this week's episode, I was joined by James Morris. James is an agile coach at Westpac. He is an agile transformation and lean governance leader with experience across digital and mobile banking, insurance, technology infrastructure, anti-financial crime, and fraud. He's invested in developing and evolving organizational capabilities, enhancing the custodianship and delivery of exceptional, scalable, and sustainable customer experiences and outcomes. He also happens to be a really good longtime friend. All right, let's get into it. Here is my conversation with this week's Ops Innovator, James Morris. Hey, James. Welcome to the Ops Innovator Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk about transforming ways of working and what innovation looks like now or what it could look like in the future when it comes to how organizations, businesses, communities, whatever, get things done. So let's jump into the fact that your career showcases a really strong path, right, in enterprise transformation, ways of working, lean governance, and that's just a few of the areas. And I mean, I know you really well, but obviously some of our audience may not. So can you share with us how you got started and what the journey was like for you sort of to get to where you are now? And maybe what are the 2 or 3 or just a few key things that others could do if they wanted to follow in your footsteps?
I guess the things that have helped me along the way is that I've had a pretty diverse career. And prior to that, I played a lot of sport, did a lot of music. And I think a lot of the sort of tangential things with those things is how much practice you put into things. And it's quite interesting when you compare that to a professional, your professional work, other than, your university studies and things like that, ongoing study. There isn't a lot of on-the-job, persistent training. And, you look at professional athletes, professional musicians, you don't stop practicing. The passion comes from the repetition. And I think that's something that's been ingrained in me from childhood, been sailing and playing hockey and basketball in juniors. And then sort of tangentially to that, and sort of opposing to that, is the careers that I've had or the working environments I've been in have been professional in terms of working for the banks in transformation, in digital. I've worked in across France and Japan as an English lecturer at medical university, so teaching med students English. I've worked as a professional English lecturer, trainer for executives in France and Japan. So very, very diverse career. Prior to that, I worked in hospitality, managing restaurants. And then there's similarities and you think about, if you stagnate in a restaurant, if you don't keep current and keep up with trends, unless you've got a generational audience, a generational customer base, you'll go out of fashion very quickly. So it's that, I guess, those things, the tie into training, persistent training, persistent trying to get better is something that's translated really nicely into my work. So I'm always looking for patterns. I'm always looking for stagnation, and stagnation to me is something to be avoided. If you plateau in any sort of business, your market and your audience, your customer base isn't stagnating. If you stagnate, there's absolutely an opportunity that you could be missing out on. So, getting to a certain, this concept of a transformation happens and it's done, and then everyone can cheer and sit back and ride the bus, is not something I've ever been comfortable with. It's something that should be pervasive and persistent.
Actually, that's a really interesting point around the practice, right? As much as I don't know if I really thought about it that way, but you're 100% right. You're that is what you're doing, isn't it? Right? You just keep practicing to get better, just like you would with any musical instrument and any sport and anything that you do. And I don't think a lot of people don't think about it that way, do they?
Yeah, I guess it ties into the concepts of agile and growth mindset. It's actually seeking opportunities to continually improve and being okay with I'm not there yet. Whereas you do a certification, you get the certification, you celebrate, and the certification can be really significant. It can be a PhD, it can be a degree. It's years and years of study, years and years of knowledge going in. But then there's this, I've done that now, and that's afforded me this new opportunity. But that's it. I've put my learning journey now on hold because now I'm in my professional journey. So maybe there's exceptions to the rule where it's ingrained in, if you're a GP, you've got continual learning that's going on. In the workplace, it should be the same. And in sort of project delivery spaces, traditionally we do a PIR, like a project in review or one of those terms, at the end of a program, say, hey, what have we learned from that? What should we do differently? And most organizations are pretty good at doing that and logging that. But very few would look at that and then review that as part of kicking off the next program and making sure those lessons that have been learned have been shared and it's been applied to the next program. And then when you think about it, well, do you want to wait a year or 2 years before you apply learning, where you want to apply that in real time when you learn? And I think, agile as a delivery mechanism is fantastic because it encourages, and as part of the structure, the framework, includes, continual retrospection, introspection, and that can be everything to how a team collaborates, how they, interpersonal relationships and the culture of the team to physically the data, what have we done? How is there any opportunities to improve the flow of that value?
How important are formalized certifications and training classes and things like that in that journey?
Like with most things, I think it's good because it will ensure that you're speaking a common language and you've got a foundational knowledge. But for me personally, experience and battle scars and being able to, even if you're not certified, being able to say, hey, well, I haven't done that certification, but here's how we work and here's how I work in this environment, whatever that is, and how that translates to these other roles. In certain circumstances, you can't have that opportunity if you haven't got that base certification. But I've seen, and a lot of people will acknowledge, as certainly individuals and companies that really chase certifications over the experience. And I think it's one thing to be very qualified, certified, and come in and provide some advisory work and walk away after a very short period of time. And I think it's a very, very different level of transformation, engagement when you're there in the weeds with the people, really embedded to mentor, support and coach and train and provide all of that sort of more embedded, almost like Shuhari type of learning approach or learning model. As opposed to, hey, here is this information, we've provided the training, now it's on you. And I think a lot of transformations have effectively failed, right, because we haven't really invested that continual support. Like, you roll out a change, we gave you the information, we should be there to help embed it and then gradually step away. So like in the Shuhari, they're taking ownership, they're comfortable with the information and the change, and then they can start applying it, and they're starting to, again, with a growth mindset, they're looking at those opportunities to improve and build on that.
So I think this is leading perfectly to what I want to get into next. And one of the things that I hope to do in this podcast is encourage people to think differently about how they might solve whatever problems they happen to be facing in their work, whether it's operational or product related or market related, whatever it is, but solve them in new ways by iterating on what others have done. What do you think the biggest operational challenges are that you've seen inside of organizations that they're facing right now that might be slowing them down or preventing them from innovating or preventing them from taking that next step? Are there operational challenges, key operational challenges you're seeing that you think need to be addressed that are ripe for innovation?
Yeah, I think it's organizational structure. So if you think there's a lot, right? But I think one of the main ones that I've experienced as a pretty common pattern is in the larger organizations, how they're structured operationally is kind of dictated by how they think about funding for certain things. So the organization gets structured based on who has money to do what sorts of things. I think there is huge opportunity for organizations just to think through that a little bit differently and have a bit more of a contemporary lens on it. And what I mean by that is, I guess if you can, as simple as this sounds, if you can swap in project delivery as one example, if you can switch out the mindset of, hey, we've got this thing that we want to do, and maybe we've prioritized and we've identified it, the next question traditionally they'll jump to is, how much will this cost? And I think a massive change in mindset and in outcome can be just flipping for how much will this cost, and then all the activity that goes to prove or justify the business value and prove the cost and go through, resource allocation and all those traditional things can be just to flip that question very early to say, how much do we want to invest in that opportunity?
Right.
So going from a cost model to an investment model, so startups do it, right? It's kind of bringing a startup mindset. Don't worry about what it will cost. How much do we want to invest in that thing, that outcome? And I think very quickly, if you're the owner of that budget at whatever level, you can say, well, I don't know the dollars, but I'll give 20% of my budget. Or you know what, if we can get that done in a year, and I spend all my budget on that, that's a massive win. I understand the business value of doing that, so that would be a great win for us, and I'd be willing to do that. I think that then predicates how you structure and what happens next. Whether whatever finance model you use, draw down, or you want the big chunk of cash up front. I think if you have then the persistent teams with the right capabilities in them, and you'll know by these investments coming down what you might need to shift in terms of capabilities to deliver those outcomes, you can very quickly make sure that the thing that you want to invest in the most, or not the most money in, but the thing that's most important to you goes to the right team with the right capabilities. And team can be team of teams. It can be 5 people to 5,000 people, whatever that is. But I think one of the things that's a constraint for us in sort of some of the larger organizations that we've worked with, is that's not how we operate. Is we might prioritize the project that we want to deliver. And as part of that prioritization, we need to know how much it's going to cost. We need to know what the ROI is going to be before we go and do. And there's all this administration, all this admin activity, project management, kickoff type activity, rather than saying, hey, we believe in this thing. It's in the ballpark funding. It's about right. We feel we've done this sort of thing before. It's completely innovative. We've never done this before, but we're still willing to place that bet, take that risk in investing that money is the right thing to do. Let's start. Let's get some discovery and experimentation, and we can periodically check in to say, is what you wanted to invest fit for what we're learning as we're going through that, or as we're building, we're actually testing it and learning, and we're testing quickly with internally or externally customers to validate that we're heading in the right direction and this thing's going to work. So we can continually move towards the thing that we want to invest in. But because we're working in that way, at any point, if we feel like the numbers aren't stacking up, we've learned something, or the market's shifted, we haven't spent all this time and secured all this money and put it aside for this program, only to then feel like, oh, well, I guess we've got 2 choices. We can, in lieu of all of this information, we can keep going and spend these millions of dollars knowing it's not going to be where we thought it would be, and we've missed that opportunity cost for reinvestment, or we can kill it. And I think that sort of investment model allows us to kill things more frequently than persist them. So we only persist the things that are really stacking up and we really do understand they're adding value. And I think the challenge with a lot of organizations is they think, well, that won't work for us because we do regulatory work or we do BAU work. But in fact, it's the same thing.
I'd love to unpack that, right? 'Cause that right there, right? As you were talking, it was the first thing that came up in my head, right? So because for project work, for delivery, and you mentioned persistent teams, right, as being something you could do, a way that maybe help contribute to this funding model, or one way you could think about making that funding model work. Do you have any thoughts on what would that practically feel like for the part of the organization that doesn't do project work? They're just doing their job. Is there a particular thing that they would feel or be exposed to in that kind of model?
I'll flip your question around and put it back to you. Like, rather than thinking what it would feel like for those people, what would it feel like for the people who are in the project world to work more like it was operational? So again, if you're in a persistent team, whether you're part of, you work super closely and within your team you've got different people have different specialities or capabilities, and there's maybe some handover or transition of the work. The flow goes through multiple hands to get to the outcome. Or you're, a specific service support, and you're supporting the organisation with advice on particular things. Hey, can you translate that? Making this change, does that impact us regulatorily? Does it impact us legally? And I think you can have those services. But if the whole organisation is in persistent teams, so we just do away with hey, here's this program, I need to go and get a BA, a project manager, portfolio manager, I need 16 testers, whatever those things are. If we can just do away with that, and you make the more of the organisation work as if it was in persistent BAU teams, then the funding is, I'm not funding a project, we're trying to get away from funding the project, we're funding an idea, an outcome. And I know that's project speak, but it's whether it's a BAU activity and it's a repeated activity, we should be asking the same thing. If this is a repeated activity, we should have standards and things. And if it's genuinely a repeat activity, why is a human doing it this day? And to the innovation, why are we having people do these repeated tasks? You can write your software, you can write code for that, and use the people for adding the value, interpreting that information, making recommendations, having the customer interactions and things like that, rather than doing the kind of, even today, manual, and even in some coding, why are we writing code for certain things when there is, perfectly good code that we can reuse? And so regression tests and automation, why are we writing new ones when they're maintained through the process of, promoting our code? So I think there's lots of opportunity to change the dialogue from, what about the BAU teams or those operational teams, to what if the whole organisation was like that? And it's, but we don't we fund those persistently. So why don't we fund, why does it make any difference? Fund your organisation, fund your department persistently.
Is that kind of like the figuring out a way to adopt sort of the agile squad and tribe model and so on, just making sure that you've got these larger teams that have all the capabilities they need in order to deliver that outcome that you talked about, whether it's aligned to a customer journey or it's aligned to a product suite or whatever they decide to do? Is it that kind of philosophy, at least, or that kind of approach, even if it's not the exact same structure?
Pretty much. I think the thing that I would also say that supports that is you as a person working in an organization, you should really be thinking of having a dual responsibility. One responsibility is doing whatever it is, the BAU, the project work, whatever that is, and it doesn't matter how it's funded, right? It's the funding part is just for, if it's R&D and there's the tax benefits and things like that, and reporting what we're spending on what. Well, that work went to that team or those teams, so and it costs that 100K a week, right? That's what it costs, right? So that becomes it prevents us from structuring the organisation based on how we want to fund. So that's better. The thing people often say, well, what about when we get with that unique piece of work and it's a really different, that piece of work doesn't fit with this existing team. And so, well, keep the majority of the team together and augment it with that additional capability. And if you've got a view of your pipeline, you should know about these things that are a little bit left field that you don't either have the capacity for in an existing team that might have otherwise done it, and you now need to grow that talent. And so that ties into the op model where you people in a duality kind of thing. One is my day job where I spend, let's say, 60% of my time, 80% of my time doing the thing that I'm paid to do. But the other part, and this is where the funding I think needs to go, is in a sort of chapter or community of practice kind of mechanism, depending on what terminology is the same thing, where you go to get better at your craft. So again, if my role is a BA, well, how do I become a better BA? And again, not divesting in those things and saying that's on our people to go and do their own capability uplift. No, organisation, if you want to get better, the thing that you should invest in heavily, particularly in the down times, which is inverse to what happens, is that's when you double down in your investment in your people. Make sure that you've got consistency and what the expectations are for a role, and people are having opportunities to meet and talk and liaise and share information between their peers in that role and actually get better. And then you're constantly uplifting the capabilities and lifting the minimum standard for those roles, in whatever those roles are: a developer, a specific type of developer, a tester, a BA, a subject matter expert. We want to continue those things to improve, so you have to invest in it. And I don't just mean put money, I mean give the people the time off their day job to go and work on that. And that can include the certification part. It can be, hey, well, we want to make sure that we've got more people that are Lean Six Sig certified, or we want more of our BAs that are certified in the national standard of business analysis, or whatever that certification is. And I think that's traditionally what in the transformations that haven't been successful is that kicks off with a very small expectation. Hey, that's only, we'll meet as a community or as a cohort, but we'll only meet for 30 minutes, once a month. And you're saying that's what you're willing to invest in the capability uplift of your people. Like, if you knew that as an insider, and you could, it's not like a big bank, it's some other organization, you would just go and open a business doing what they do and invest triple what they're investing. And in a very short period of time, you'd be much more efficient and better, and have happier, more engaged colleagues in your organization, and you would blow that organization out of the water.
So look, we're coming up to the end, and I'll admit I'm going to be really embarrassed if I find anything new out about you by asking this question, but I'm going to give it a go anyway, and we'll see what happens, just because we've spent so much time together and I know you so well. But what exciting things do you have coming up in your career, in your life, or just things that you're going to be focusing on that you might want to share with the audience?
I think I've been very fortunate that the opportunities that I've had. I think I was in a startup for a while, and that was a really, really exciting experience, because you got to start with a clean sheet. And having that opportunity to start with a clean sheet, employ professionals that are really capable in their specific roles, but still very open to continual learning and sharing that learning. That was an experience that I'll cherish. I tried to bring that, I guess, startup, leaner kind of thinking into the larger organizations that I work with. And I do see, recurring patterns, right. Transformations start, they stop. There's hey, we've gone agile, and you kind of look under the covers and you're okay, agile by name, not by nature. And I think there's this view that, hey, we've gone agile, we've done this transformation, it's a silver bullet and we're done. And again, I think it's about the coming in after that transition or that transformation or that step, and then coming in and building on it is something that we see. And it's a little bit of a pendulum mechanism where we jump into it fairly heavily, but we still compromise a lot. We haven't really gone into it as thoroughly as we could, and we haven't provided that additional support, right. that persistent support, or the mechanisms in the organization to ensure that continues. And then there's a divestment in investment in that support, that capability. And then what I've heard from a lot of people is, we were doing really well. We had this coach or this team member who was doing this with us at a team level or at an enterprise level, and then they went away, and then it just sort of slowly deteriorates and the old behaviours creep back in because you don't have that continual match fitness. So the things that are exciting for me, I guess, at the moment is the realization that there's always opportunities to go back into organizations, and you might, have been there at one point, you walk away and you're frustrated, or you walk away and you've celebrated how great it is. The next person that comes along, it's just a little bit easier because the organization's a bit more match fit. So the next conversation's just a little bit easier. And, there's this next wave of improvement. And then they go away, and then you might come back and you see it again and you go, oh, God, how is it that you're only here? What happened? You're on this trajectory and you're not where you...
I set it up perfectly for you.
I wouldn't go that far at all. But, you were showing the signs of this investment, this continual evolution in your organization, and then something changed and it persists, it just flattened out and went backwards.
Right.
But I guess the The exciting thing is, as I've gotten older and a bit more mature, maybe having a bit thicker skin, knowing that, you know, it is a pendulum. Change. It would be great if it was a little bit more linear and it was just a bit more persistent, but it does ebb and flow. And sometimes your job might be, my role might be just to make the next person's job a bit easier. So you might be the person with the sledgehammer breaking stuff, and then you're not going to be the right person to rebuild that. Psychologically, you've damaged relationships effectively, but that's to make the next person's job a bit. It's helped, you know, change your mindset, change an approach. You won't be the person that takes them to the next level. And I think if you're passionate about what you do in transformation, you've got to acknowledge and accept that you're not going to be the hero. You're probably going to be equal parts villain. To some people that you might spend the time with, you're absolutely going to be celebrated and things like that. But to others, you're a villain, and that's okay. I think that's for me, that's really important. I'm happy to walk away having broken stuff, lobbed a grenade, but equally, I like to be the med, the guy that's there to do the soft, rebuild of the organisation and get it back in a healthier position than when it was before the deconstruction happened. So I guess there's two. There's the Band-Aid in one pocket and the sledgehammer in another. I've come prepared.
I love it. I think a perfect way to sort of wrap things up, because I know that usually we could keep talking forever, but I don't know there's a better way to end the conversation than what you just said there. So thank you so much, James, for being this week's Ops Innovator. It was really great speaking with you, and appreciate your time.
Likewise, Scott. I'll talk to you soon, mate. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Ops Innovator is produced in Sydney, Australia by 10% Labs. Our purpose is to engage thought leaders from all backgrounds, industries, and professions to explore what it takes to be truly innovative in how people and organizations work. From operating models and organizational structures, through policy and process to ways of thinking and working, it's about doing things differently and bringing the future forward to make things better now. The opinions shared by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent those of any organizations with whom they may be associated. If you would like to join the conversation as a future guest, or if you'd like to spotlight your startup that is focused on improving how organizations work, visit us at 10percentlabs.com. Until next time, this is Scott Williams encouraging you to keep looking for ways to do things differently so you can do them better.